Hello, Fibre Muses, and welcome to the Fibre Muse podcast. This is episode 4, recorded on February 1st, 2018. This is your host, Francoise, aka Frenchie, and my lovely co-hosts, Chelsea and Claire, were unable to join me for today's recording. Claire is currently in Los Angeles doing a trunk show at the Altered Stitch. So for those in the Los Angeles area, please pop in over there to say hello to her and to pick up a couple skeins of her yarn. She is absolutely a lovely person to meet in person, and I'm sure she'll be more than just like excited to meet all of her fans. And then Chelsea, she just has a really busy schedule this week, so I told her, to not worry about it, so she can focus on what she needs to get done. And so I was planning on doing this podcast by myself, but I was able to find somebody last minute to join me this week for a special episode. So I'm really excited to bring in a friend, Ayumi. She lives in Japan just like me. Can I say what you do? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So she works as an English teacher here in Japan. I'm further up north. I'm down in Osaka, down in the south. And so she lives a bit further up north. But I asked her to come on today. She is an avid listener of so many podcasts already. And she plans on doing possibly a podcast herself sometime in the future. So I said, hey, why don't you come on and, have a chat with me, just talk about being a knitter in Japan, because she also grew up in the States. So she has that unique experience of being like in the culture, like the knitting culture in the States and in Japan, even more so than me, because she speaks Japanese, where mine is just like, it's just terrible. So I was really excited to have her come on today. So hello, Ayumi, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Nothing to complain about.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I wouldn't say my Japanese is not perfect. In fact, I'm working on studying more this year as one of my New Year's resolutions.
Good.
To take the proficiency exam at the end of the year. I'm hoping to see where that takes me. But yeah.
How long have you been knitting for?
I've been knitting for 12 years. I started when I was 15 in high school. I had just been through a bunch of not so great things in my life. And I had already been kind of interested in knitting. And my mother tried to teach me, but to be honest, she's not the best teacher. Her method is, I'll tell you how to do it once, and if you don't do it perfectly, I'll yell at you. So, so that because of that, I didn't really quite learn properly at first. And then when my parents split up, and my dad's girlfriend right afterward, she's the one that actually taught me to knit. And she's Irish American, so she taught me English style knitting, which she learned from her family.
And the English style knitting is picking or throwing, because that's how I'm throwing. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, my mother taught me how to knit, but she was just learning how to knit too. So once I taught myself the basics, I just sped off ahead of her.
Yeah, I don't know. She, my dad's ex never really did anything with her own knitting herself. It was just that she knew how to, and I was interested, so she taught me. And I think that first I was just knitting tons and tons of scarves for my friends. Even now, I don't actually wear a lot of knits, even though I'm very much an avid knitter. Like, I need to knit to live.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, so I think maybe in my first year of knitting, I just made scarves for all my friends. So it was like a thing that all my friend group, that they had their own Ayumi scarf. It was really funny.
That's cute. I like that.
Yeah, and then after that, I connected more to the mother of one of my friends, who is a professional knitter. She did machine knits for pretty big clothing companies and stuff like that. So that was great because, my friend didn't knit, but I did. So she would give me all her excess yarn. It was always really high quality, which was great.
Wow.
Yeah, and then around that same time, some other students actually finally started a knitting club at my high school, so I joined that, and that was pretty cool.
Well, that's really cool. I mean, I've been only knitting for this is like my January 2nd. Oh, you listened to that episode, so you know how long I've been knitting for, like 4 years. 4 years now, was that? Is that it? So I never, in high school, I've always been knitting by myself. I never really had that community to knit for, so I'm kind of jealous of you for
most of my knitting life has been kind of by myself, but there was there's a local yarn shop that was 2 train stations away from my high school, so I would sometimes go there after school. But I never really felt a sense of like connection to other folks there as much, but it was my introduction to I guess what you would call more standard Ravelry like knitting community. And then I think that was around the time that Ravelry started. So that was back when you had to actually request an invitation to Ravelry. So I joined that way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was pretty interesting. But I didn't really get more interested in various different kinds of knitting techniques and things like that until maybe a few years ago as well.
When you moved to Japan, is that when you think that you got into it more?
No, it was definitely, I would think about 2 years before. So I think I was still in college. I took quite a long time to graduate actually, but yeah, that was when I started. At first, I think part of it was just not being able to afford yarn, like the kind that I wanted to use for the most part. So, but then again, like not really having any particular purpose. Like I never was wearing knits even from the store or anything. So I'm trying to think of, yeah, well, I think what happened was maybe when I started to get into knitting podcasts is when I started to explore different things. And then I taught myself how to spin with a drop spindle. I tried support spindling, but that did not work out at all. Yeah, and so I would say about the year before I moved here. So I've been in Japan for almost 2 years now, actually 2 years this month. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, so I think about a year before that was when I taught myself spinning, and at first it was just pretty ugly, really thick and thin yarn, I guess. But now I can make pretty good yarn that I'm happy with on occasion, though I don't spin as much right now. I kind of switch between spinning and knitting. It's really rare for me to do both at the same time.
I just stick to the knitting. I haven't even tried.
Spinning is definitely very fun in its own way and makes you think a lot more about the yarn you use, I think, understanding the process.
Yeah, I guess, if you're working with the fiber and learning how it gets spun up into the actual yarn that you'll use for knitting gives you a different perspective on it. I mean, just for me, I just knit with the yarn people, give me the yarn and I just make something out of it. But I do hope that I'll be able to try spinning or even weaving or a different type of fiber arts someday, because like I said, I just do knitting and designing, but I would definitely like to deepen my relationship with like fiber because I love it so much.
Yeah, and we could probably get more into it later on in the episode, but I did also start learning weaving last year at my new local yarn shop.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that's been pretty fun. I made 2 scarves, and then I am actually in the middle of a skirt, which I finished the weaving of, but I have to do some crochet or something along the edges to make it wearable.
Wow, skirt, is it like a full length skirt?
Yeah, it's quite large. I tend to wear pretty long skirts, I guess, and with a high waist. And so I think it's about knee length. But at the moment, it's just like it basically looks like a very, very thick giant stole that I can't actually put around my neck. So I have to put some buttons on there and just crochet some edging to make it clean up a little bit.
Wow, that's super cool. I can't wait to see that. I'm sure I'll follow you on Instagram to see your final results for that.
Yeah, it's exciting also because I used a whole bunch of hand spun for it. But the main color I bought from my yarn shop, which is like this really nice lavender. So it's all mixed up and stuff. Oh yeah, that's definitely.
If you know me, I was like, you're talking about purple. I'm like, yes, I love it. It's perfect already.
Yeah, actually, my colors, I definitely gravitate a lot more towards pink than lavender, but lavender is pretty cool too.
Yeah, for me.
I like soft colors. So.
Yeah, I mean, I like just following you on a social media because that's where we met, right? Social media.
Yes. You actually, I think, might have followed me first from, I don't know, I tag all my knitting posts knitting, and I remember you followed me, and I was like, how is this super young girl already designer? This is what's going on with me.
I'm not that much younger than yeah.
This is true. I'm
27,
but
yeah, I'm turning 26 this year, so we're just like a year or two apart. So I'm not super young.
Yeah, but
no, younger.
You were already designing and things. I was like, oh my god, what am I doing? Like, I'm just sitting here.
You're changing the world in your own way.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think so. I might have like followed you, and because you were you in Japan at that time?
No, I don't remember.
I don't think you were actually.
No, probably not.
And then I guess just from your post popping up, you started talking about teaching in Japan, and then we started chatting because I was like, somebody's coming to Japan, yay! Because
yes, definitely something like that.
Yeah, and then we met up in Osaka last year for
It was New Year's.
Was it New Year's? Did we also meet up the day before for like that cup of coffee at?
No, we did. It was all the same day. We went to the
Okay.
We went to the temple or the shrine, I should say. And that was pretty fun. Yeah, that was on New Year's Day.
Cool.
That was pretty cool. Because I was born in Osaka, so my family is.
I didn't know that.
Down there. Yeah. They're in Hirakata, which is a little further from the big main city, but so I was mostly there to visit my family, of course, but of course I wanted to see you too. It's a good chance for that. And then this year I went back to New York, which is where I grew up. So I had New Year's there with my family.
Were you able to visit the yarn shops up in New York?
No, I did not have time, but I honestly didn't really have any interest in doing that. So I still have many boxes of yarn from my stash left in the US. Last year, my father, stepmother, and brother all came to here. So I live in Utsunomiya, Tochigi. So it's 2 hours north of Tokyo. And they sent me all sorts of yarn from my stash. I think my dad used space bags to vacuum seal, and they each had a whole bag of yarn in their suitcase. It was amazing. And my stepmother is also a crocheter from time to time, but she makes acrylic blankets mainly when she has the time. And she's quite busy. She's a fashion design manager, so she doesn't really do much at the moment, but she had a lot of yarn in storage too, so my dad accidentally also gave me some of her yarn. But yeah, it was like over 100 skeins of soft yarn that they brought over.
Jeez.
Yeah, which is great because soft yarn is very hard to come by in Japan.
Yeah, that's interesting because for me, my stash isn't that big. So, me going to yarn shops, I like doing that all the time, especially in Japan here. But anyway, talking about being a knitter in Japan, you mentioning that's really hard to find sock yarn in Japan. Maybe we can use this as a segue to get into maybe like the differences or, between being a knitter in America and being a knitter in Japan. And and I think you have some really great insights since you're being a knitter for quite longer than me, and I've been mostly a knitter in Japan. For these 4 years that I've been knitting, I spent like maybe 6 months being a knitter in America, but then most of my knitting experience was in Japan and mostly in isolation, where I was before. So maybe I'll pass it over to you. Like maybe just you can share whatever experiences or what observations you've made about being a knitter in the States versus being a knitter in Japan.
Okay. Well, so the main thing I think is most people, I guess most women, learn how to knit in school, usually kind of a home economics
in Japan
type of class. Yes, in Japan. Okay. Something that I mean, at least in New York City, I didn't have that experience. But I know there are some places. I mean, I didn't have any home economics in my New York City high school.
Yeah, I didn't have any. Yeah, none for that where I was too.
Yeah. So I think that's one factor. So usually when I tell the average person that I knit as a hobby, they think, oh, that's so great and creative. But then the next thing they usually say is that it's so girly that I do that, which is very frustrating, of course.
Yeah.
There's nothing to do with being a girl, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's usually seen as being very homey, I suppose. And I don't know anyone my age here that does any sort of knitting or any other crafts. Um, and that's another thing maybe that's important linguistically is that in Japanese, the same verb is used for both knit and crochet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's and in that way, it's also used for a few other things. So like even braiding is called a three-way knitting in a way.
Yeah.
So usually people are talking about knitting, but you can, if they also do crochet, it's use the same word for it. So then you're specifying what kind of needles you're using. And I think from my experience at craft stores, they're quite similar, I think, between craft stores in America. So like going to Michael's or Joann's is quite similar to the craft stores here. And there are lots of local yarns. But if you want to have, I don't know, I guess what you would call, I don't want to say it's a higher level that puts the other stuff down, and that's really not fair, but the kind that you might expect to do if you are avid on Ravelry or listen to knitting podcasts. That kind of yarn, you'd have to go to specialty stores, which are few and far between. There are a few in Tokyo, but there aren't any like that here in Utsunomiya. So what I do is I have my local yarn shop, which is quite a little hole in the wall. It's called Otaya, and the owner, just one guy, he is a weaver and spinner. He knows how to knit, and he also knows how to dye, dye fibers. So he does a little bit of that. And he also does needle felting, which is great because I think the main source of his business is really selling his work. So he sells his woven scarves, which are all stunning. And then he also does, he makes these needle felted people and sheep, which are super, super cute. So he just has like if you go to the shop, you'll see a spinning wheel outside, and then inside in the window, there's just this huge collection of needle felted sheep in all sorts of different colors.
So cute.
Like some of them have little clovers on printed on them, kind of like a My Little Pony cutie mark, like this little symbols and stuff. So it's super cute. And even though he does sell yarn, and he also has some fiber, but I think I'm the only spinner that comes to his shop, so he doesn't sell much fiber as anyone else. It's mostly about reselling his goods there, but people do come in, and there are definitely I would say a good group of regulars that I see there that stop by, and they all have different crafts that are all related to yarn, but they don't spend that much time outside of that shop, basically. Most of them are older women who are retired, so they have a lot of free time on their hands, and they're learning to do things like weaving or knitting for the first time now. And so it was a feeling that they maybe didn't have enough time to do that when they were younger, so they always think it's so great that I'm already a crafter and things like that.
Yeah,
and they're always really fascinated when I come in showing them things that I've made with, say, indie dyed yarn and things like that. They've never seen anything like it before. I remember maybe my first time there, I was wearing a hitchhiker shawl, which most people who know podcasts that are on Ravelry know the hitchhiker shawl. By Vera Valmaki, but they had never seen anything like that before, and they were so fascinated by the little triangular marks on the side, and like, oh, how do you do that? That's so cool. And also the yarn was in I can't remember what yarn I used for that, but it's definitely indie dyed variegated yarn, so it's just very unlike anything. I mean, I think when it comes to Japanese yarn in outside of Japan, the most famous yarn would be Nodo, I think.
Yeah. Because even that yarn, when I lived in Kumamoto, which is like, super like way down in the south, when I went to those craft stores, Nodo was like the only brand that I recognized. The other yarns in there were just like, other.
So the big, in Japan, the big yarn brands are Diamond, Daruma, and Olympus. And I think they all have pretty much standard, like whatever you'd like to make, they have it in wool. Most of it is not machine wash and dry. Though I did get some Daruma superwash merino that I'm not sure it would be good for socks, but I have to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're all just like pretty standard craft store selections, I think, and there are a lot of interesting colors and things, and they usually have samples of tops, usually like sleeveless shirts and vests, maybe some baby clothes, maybe some hats, but not as much of that. As far as sock yarn in Japan, there's really only one that I know of, which is the Olympus Make socks. So
Make?
They're called Make. It says Make. They are, well, the original kind I can't use because it has mohair and I'm very sensitive. So even if it's like 5% mohair, I can feel it and I can't touch it. But they recently created a new version, which is called Make Socks 2. And that one has nylon and superwash merino.
Nice.
But it's good, but the colors are definitely like baby colors, and it's a pretty heavy fingering weight. So it is sock yarn, and you have to buy them in 25-gram balls.
Mm-hmm.
So if depending on who you're making socks for, you can get away with buying 2 or 3. But for me, I usually socks are basically the only knit item I wear on a regular basis, especially in the winter. So for me, usually my socks take about 60 to 65 grams of yarn. Yeah, anyway, so when it comes to Nodo yarn, it's really hard to find. Like, most craft stores will have some, but it's not the sought after yarn. So, and it's also more expensive. So it's they usually don't carry much of it, if they do at all. And but if people who want to visit Japan want to get their hands on Nodo, I always recommend there's a shop in Shinjuku, Tokyo called Okadaya, which is actually just fascinating to go to in general because it's 2 buildings, many stories. It's a huge craft store. They have one side's all fabric. They have stuff if you want to make costumes. They have wigs. They have anything you could imagine that you would want to make. If anything that requires like I guess pretty much any craft, and they have just 1 floor of yarn, but they have pretty good quality yarn. So they have just a whole shelf of all the Nodo you could want, and they also have lots of well, when I went there, I noticed they had a lot of German sock yarn that was discontinued, so no longer available. Even online, you can't find it anymore. So like the opal and the regia specialty colorways, usually series themed and stuff. So I got a lot of those the last time I went. Yeah. And if you want, I think unless you're going to shop online, which is complicated in Japan, it's going to be difficult to try to find that indie yarn that's from Japan in particular.
Yeah. I don't know many indie yarn dyers from Japan. I mean, I knew one who actually lived in Japan, but she wasn't Japanese. She used to live in Tokyo, but she's a dyer from New Zealand. But she later moved. She moved a while back. So I don't know any Japanese, like Japanese-born Japanese indie yarn dyers here.
I know they exist because I follow a lot of Japanese knitters on Instagram. So I know that there are people who are making their own yarn and selling it on Etsy and things like that. So it says, let me start over. It exists, but it's very, very small compared to the US and Europe and Australia.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's hard to find sock yarn, so that implies that most people don't knit socks, and you also said that they were really amazed by, the shawls that you made. So what type of projects are typical for the knitters that you usually that you see?
Well, I've noticed it's usually pretty much they're very functional projects. So like, for example, there's this one woman who I almost always see in there weaving every week, and she weaves scarves always, and they're great because she does natural yarn dyeing at home. She just like, I think she just goes out and finds, I don't know, she knows where to go and find all these flowers and other things to dye with. So she dyes her yarn at home, and then she comes and weaves with it there, and it's really nice, but definitely only functional. Then I see a lot of bags, so felted bags, usually woven or knit and then felted. Though I think that knitting might be best for felting because weaving creates a thinner fabric than knitting. But yeah, I don't see much else other than that, but they're usually exploring other things about crafting and not necessarily making things, that I've seen anyway. I don't often see a lot of finished objects there. But yeah, the idea of finding patterns online was new to them for most of them. I mean, we're talking about people who still use flip phones for the most part.
Yeah.
So they're not really online much. But yeah, it's pretty interesting to see. Just basically the kind of things that I'm making, because I am listening to podcasts, because I'm on Ravelry and things, I'm very involved in an online sense with the knitting community. Those sorts of things are just really unheard of. And when I go to bookstores and look for craft books, I find that they're mostly quite simple. Again, just really functional garments. Usually we're using worsted or bulky weight yarn. And just, you want a red scarf, so you're going to buy some red yarn. But very simple.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I don't think there are a lot. I mean, there are some multicolored yarns, but I think that for the people that I talk to anyway, they're not really so interested in that. They're usually interested in function more than anything else.
Yeah, that's really interesting listening to you talk about your experience in knitting, because where I am in Osaka, I'm very fortunate to be pretty close by to a local yarn shop. And when I say local yarn shop, I mean like kind of like what I would consider to be like a local yarn shop in America. Because we got plenty of craft stores and stuff like that here, but I don't go to those. I go to that local yarn shop, and unsurprisingly, I met the yarn shop owner through Instagram and became friends through that. And so I go to her shop like almost every week, and she has like indie hand-dyed yarns from different places around the world. She does have some Japanese yarns like daruma. Is it daruma or duruma? Daruma. But she specializes in finding those like unique dyers from different places around the world. She's got people from Italy, from Portugal, from South Africa, and things like that. And her clientele that come in usually skew on the younger side, around like the 30s and 40s. Sorry, my voice is going out. So around the 30s and 40s. And I noticed that a lot of them are Stephen West fans. Like Stephen West, that's his name. Yeah, so they come in with his, what's that shawl name they released a couple of years ago?
He has a lot of those.
I know, he has a lot of shawls.
He has a lot of shawls. I've made some of them.
Yeah.
I actually met Stephen West.
Yeah.
I went, I was very lucky to, through Ravelry, get an opportunity to work at Folk Knitting Live at a yarn store booth. And when I was actually going to get my badge to be let into the marketplace, Stephen West was like right next to me, and I was like, whoa. And he was doing some sort of fashion show. I think it was during the Stephen and Stephen like craze. I don't know exactly. But it was around that time he was doing some sort of fashion show on the same floor as that marketplace. So I got to at least hear him and stuff. So that was interesting.
Yeah. He's very popular like around, I guess, because I've only been like, because when I go to that yarn shop and I'm always around, those yarns and, you know, the people who come in. I'm just like, oh, I guess this is just normal for Japan, but I'm guessing that's actually just really super niche. And I'm just lucky I was able to get
it's also just because you're in Osaka, which is the
that's
second
also,
biggest city in Japan.
Yes.
So like, my experience, you know, like I said, if I want to go to get like more sock yarn and things like that, I have to go to Tokyo. And so I don't actually know what the scene is like in Tokyo, but I can imagine it's probably similar.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm not in a small town like where you used to live, but I'm in a small city. So,
yeah. Yeah, so I'm very grateful to be in Osaka, because if I was still where I was before, I would just be like, I cannot handle this. I need my yarn. I need a community. I need a place to hang out.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. It's definitely something I appreciated having as well. I mean, I found my yarn shop totally by accident. I was just wandering my city, and this place is actually quite close to our train station. I would say it's about 3 blocks away. And I just saw a spinning wheel, and I was like, oh, hey, this is my place. And I walked in and I just said hi. And like I said before, my Japanese is not perfect, but the yarn shop owner does know a tiny amount of English, like enough that we can have conversations. So oftentimes I will go in there and I will knit or now weave, and just talk with him for hours. And it's been very good for practice, just because I don't have a lot of opportunities as an English teacher to practice my Japanese.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. The yarn shop owner where I go to every week, the name of her shop's called, it's a Turkish word, Eylül. I think that's how you pronounce it. Because she used to, she once visited Turkey, and then when she came back, she set up a store selling items from Turkey and things like that. And then later she shifted over to also selling yarn in her shop and stuff. So that's why the name of the shop is a Turkish word.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's interesting. My stepmother also used to sell jewelry from Turkey. Back when she first met my dad, that's what she was doing.
Yeah. So where was I going with that thought? What was I? Totally forgot. Oh yeah, the yarn shop owner. So she speaks English like fluently, although she'll probably say, no, I don't. But yeah, she always gives.
Most
she always
people
likes,
don't.
Yeah,
they don't admit how much they speak.
Yeah, but she always likes to tease me for how little Japanese I know. I'm just like, you're totally right. But whenever I go there, you know, it's like whenever I go to the shop, it's usually with the intention of staying there the entire afternoon. She likes to feed me and give me drinks and things like that. We just like to chat around, and sometimes I help her around the shop. You know, if she's really busy, I'll just do some things for her.
That's really nice.
Yeah, and it's also she's made some of my samples, and you can find some of my little shawl shapes around the shop as well. And also I like her book collection. She has like lots of books from Pom Pom magazine, Amirisu, you know, those big I could say there's more like niche magazines and stuff like that you'd typically find on Ravelry. Like I think she really focuses on helping her Japanese customers get comfortable with knitting patterns from Ravelry and stuff like that. Right. And that's what her aim is.
That's pretty great. Yeah, my yarn shop owner, he has a blog that he keeps, and I know he's taken some pictures of what I'm working on to post on the blog, but I've never actually seen the blog himself. And his understanding, he's heard of Ravelry. He heard of it before I mentioned it. And all he knows about indie yarn is he knows Malabrigo.
Yeah.
That's it. And he has a little bit, very, very little, but for him it's like that's such an expensive yarn that he almost it's very, very rare for him to want to get some, because for the most part there's no need, there's no I guess there's no demand, I should say, for that kind of yarn. Yeah, so we have it's mostly local yarn, mostly those brands I mentioned before, Diamonds, and there's some Olympus, I think, as well, and Daruma, but he actually has mostly even more local yarn. So just like getting stuff from, like directly from mills and things like that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, for the local, like with the yarn shop I go to here, there are a few other local yarn shops. Like there's in Kyoto, there's Amirisu. In Tokyo, there's I think they might have closed down, but I'm not sure. Hitsuji Dama, I think that's the name of it. But it's just really...
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it has like little sheep on it.
The only other places I've been to aside from Okodaya is Moritz, which is in Marunouchi. And that place, it's really cute. It's a bit smaller, but they have mostly foreign yarn. So I go there, and for a while it was the only place I knew to get indie dyed yarn. So I got there. I went there for Manos de Uruguay Alegria.
Oh yeah.
Which they have it in some like totally wild colors as well. But then otherwise I think they have what is it called? Harrison tweed, I think. They have some American tweed yarns and things like that.
Not Brooklyn tweed.
No, not Brooklyn tweed. No. I think it's I think it's the one from maybe New Hampshire. I don't remember. Somewhere from up in the Northeast. And then the only other yarn shop I've been to in Tokyo is called Puppy Yarn. So that place I went to once, again, trying to see if I could find like sock yarn or something like that. It was a place that had its own yarn, but also had some yarn from overseas. But that place was a very different environment for me. It didn't really feel welcoming. It kind of was, it seemed more like everyone who was there has been there, going there forever, and they have their own kind of, I don't want to say clique, it sounds like a strong word, but just their own community. And so they seemed very confused almost by my appearance. It was really weird. It's just like, I'm just looking for some yarn, and I can't be the only person. I mean, I'm Japanese, but I'm also American. So because my father's American, I don't look Japanese to most Japanese people. So I just felt it was very strange, especially in Tokyo, for someone like me to turn heads, I guess, in a yarn shop.
And also in Tokyo, you have so many foreigners. It's just like one more foreigner is not, it's like, why are you looking at me? You've seen plenty of foreigners before.
Yeah, it just seems like no way that they wouldn't, know, but maybe it's because they didn't have anything in English. I think their website is only in Japanese. And I did get some yarn there, but I just felt very much like, I'm not supposed to be here.
I've gotten that same vibe from other yarn stores before. I'm not going to name names because I do want to encourage people to go there because the yarns are lovely. But whenever I would go in there, the staff was just really quiet. Even though I know they speak English too. But it was just like, stepping on eggshells. It was just like, tiptoeing, being very quiet, but the yarn selection was lovely, absolutely lovely. But the other yarn shop that I popped to mind was Yarnaholic in Tokyo, but it's an online shop only. But it's just really interesting with these local yarn shops that focus on, getting indie hand-dyed yarns from internationally and stuff like that. They kind of have to they don't communicate with each other, but they have to keep an eye out on what other people are selling, because I'm guessing if you're living in Japan and you're Japanese, you understand how to order online and stuff like that. Ordering yarn is quite easy, and it gets to you within the next day or so. So if you're like, oh, I want to get Julia Slen, I could just go to Yarnaholic and get the yarn there. Or if you wanted to get a different yarn brand like Brooklyn Tweed, I'll just go to Amirisu and stuff like that. So each store has to keep an eye out for what the other store is selling so they don't overlap, because they have to keep it, because they have to think about most people buy the yarns online. At least that's what so it's just like,
the
with
online
each
ordering thing in Japan is also, I mean, it's not difficult, but it's very different because I do some ordering online, mostly because Japan has cash on delivery for online orders, which is incredibly convenient, or you have to go to a convenience store to pay for things. But there was one other thing I forgot to mention before, which is kind of important, especially for people who want to come to Japan to buy things that they want to, take home, is the Japanese needle size system is different from the West. The U.S. system, it's its own mess, I think, but otherwise you're going to be able to buy needles in increments of 0.5 millimeter sizes. But in Japan, the increments are 0.3 millimeters. So my kind of rule of thumb is remembering that Japanese 3 needle is 3 millimeters, and then like say Japanese 4 will be 3.3, Japanese 5 is 3.6, 3.9, etc. So it's I think it can be confusing, and especially even with brands that you might know, like Clover is a very popular brand overseas, but yeah, in Japan they're going to be in the Japanese sizes. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to pick up some needles while I'm in Japan, because that's obviously getting yarn is great, but needles theoretically last longer. So I think those are also a popular gift to bring home. But I've seen that even on other podcasts. They're like, oh, I bought some needles in Japan. I think it's the right size. It says this. And I'm like, no, don't use that for this project. It's too small.
Oh, that's interesting. Actually, I mean, I guess I remember seeing like there's the Japanese size US and then the it's metric or something like that. But right. Since I got my set of like is it Hiya needles? Haya?
I usually hear it pronounced Haya.
Okay, I'll say Haya needles. Because I got that set, I guess I've never really thought about that. So it's been a while since I've had to like go to the shop and get needles. And again, when I usually have to buy needles, I get them from the local yarn shops, and they like the Haya, and they're in the American size.
Right. Yeah. For me, I don't buy needles unless I have to in like at a craft store. I have a few, but for the most part, especially because I'm mainly a sock knitter, I would buy them online, because on Amazon Japan you can get I usually get Addies these days, Addi Turbo, Addi Sock Rockets, things like that. So those you're getting in the metric system. And the US sizes are, I think the issue with them is that they have some gaps. Like the size, I think it's the difference between like 9 and 10 is kind of ridiculous, but usually it's also, in general, it's mostly 0.5 millimeters, except for when you're going smaller, because then you have US 1, 1.5, and stuff like that. Those are 0.25 millimeter increments.
Interesting.
But still kind of, they make more mathematical sense to me than 0.3.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, why 0.3? That doesn't, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're getting close to, the times, like it's almost noon here, and I know you have to get back to work. So I think we'll wrap it up here. And I'm pretty sure, like, if, my co-hosts aren't able to join me, I'll be like, hey, why don't you come back on? Let's have some more chats if that sounds
good. I would love to. We didn't even talk about what we're knitting right now.
Exactly. Yeah, we didn't even have time to get into that, because I've got my projects, and I'm sure you got your projects as well, but maybe we can schedule that for next time. So thank you so much for joining me today, Ayumi. I really appreciate it. It was just really fascinating.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's incredibly honored. It's my first time on a podcast. So
yay!
Yay!
Yeah, well, you're a natural at it. You just made this really easy because you did all of the talking. I was like, oh, this is gonna be so easy to edit.
I hope I was clear enough.
Oh, you were perfect. So anyway, so where can people, if you're okay with sharing, where can people find you in the social media stratosphere?
Okay, well, if you're just into knitting and want to talk to me about that, I'm on Ravelry as Sweetfishnits, no hyphens or underscores. So, and on Instagram, I'm at Sweetfish, but sweet is spelled like Suite, and fish is like the band, so Phish. On Twitter, I'm Sweetfishdream, but there I'm not going to post as much about knitting. Probably more about maybe smartphone games and other things.
Love Live, is that the name of it?
Yes, mostly Love Alive. So for Instagram and Ravelry, the main things. And if you want to email me, my email is sweetfishdream@gmail.com.
Yes, and I'll put all those links in the show notes if you want to follow up with her. You can find me on Instagram at avid-podcast. You can join the Facebook group, the Fibre Muse Circle, where we're currently, I think I'm releasing this podcast on the 2nd. So we're kind of like in the middle of the 5 shawls, 5 days challenge. So if your Instagram is being taken over by those mini shawls, I am the reason why. You can also find me on my website as well at avid-podcast, and also on Facebook at avid-podcast. And if you want to send me an email, you can send it to hello@avid-podcast.com. So thank you so much, Ayumi, for joining me today. And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in this week for this very special podcast episode. See ya.
Bye.
Okay.